Everyone, thank you for joining us for opening night at the Radical Book Fair. If you are here for this evening's event on Palestinian narratives, please do make your way down. There's lots of seats in the front row as well. We won't pick on you, it's fine. Thank you for wearing your mask tonight and being part of this small act of collective care in these winter flu-y months. Noor is our host. Noor Hemani is our host for tonight, and she will be introducing our speakers. But to welcome them onto the stage, will you please put your hands together for tonight's speakers?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this very, very cold evening. I commend your bravery. I hope you're all warm, and I hope you all have jackets and or blankets. Yes, excellent. So the setup of this event is that I will do a brief introduction. We'll have some readings. We'll have some questions from me, and then we'll have some questions from you. So if you wouldn't mind keeping the burning questions in your head until that point, at which point I will call upon you, and it's going to be amazing. So our event today is on Palestinian narratives, to tell our stories, what it means to tell these stories at a pivotal moment, at a moment that what many of us are watching on in horror, but at a moment that has not just started now. The genocide is not the beginning, and inshallah it will not be the end. But we do have to think about how we got here, and we do have to think about the way that we tell these stories. And so I'm joined by three exceptional writers and editors, people who are dedicated to narrative and to telling stories. And so let me introduce them. We have Basma Ghalayini, an Arabic language translator and interpreter born and grown in the Gaza Strip. She is series editor on all of Comma Press's Arabic titles, including the anthology Palestine Plus 100, and has written for the New York Times. We have Sireen Sawalha, who was born in the small village of Kufr in Jenin, Palestine. She moved to the US in 1990, completed her bachelor's and master's degrees at Rider University. Recognized by Cornell University for her outstanding contributions to education in 2022, Sireen serves as a social studies teacher in New Jersey. And My Brother, My Land is the story of her family. And we have Sami Hermez, PhD and associate professor of anthropology at Northwestern University in Qatar. He obtained his doctorate degree from the Department of Anthropology at Princeton University. He is the author of War is Coming, Between Past and Future Violence in Lebanon, published in 2017, and My Brother, My Land, A Story from Palestine, published in 2024. Can I have a round of applause for our writers and editors, please? So to sum very, very briefly before we have some readings, Basma was the editor for Palestine Plus 100, which is an anthology of sci-fi writing set in the year 2048, 100 years post-Nakba, and has worked on Atif Abu Saif's diaries. This one is A Drone Eats with Me, but there are more that Abu Saif published last year. And then we also have Sireen and Sami's book, My Brother, My Land, which is the story of Sireen's family, and particularly her brother and her close family living in Jenin. I'd like to invite Basma first to give us a reading. All good?
Yeah. Thank you for having us, Noor. And I start with I live in Manchester, and from the beginning of the genocide, I've just struggled with the idea that you're continuing with normality in Manchester, and you have all this access to loss and anger going on back home in Gaza, just being in touch with your friends and family on a daily basis, all while needing to just continue with the mundane things that you do every day. It's just, I really struggled with that. And I wrote this piece for Wasafiri, an online journal, around September time. The car speakers vibrate to a low electronic beat, but intermittent images keep invading my thoughts. A man in his early 40s lies blindfolded on the ground with a number spray-painted on his naked back. He's pleading, Ya Immi, oh mother, as he is kicked in the head by an Israeli Defense Force soldier. I turn up the music. Ya Immi. No, not loud enough. Up it goes again. Ya Immi. Okay, all the way up now. For the last few months, I've watched helplessly as my home city has been erased from existence. My mother's home, my father's clinic, the house I grew up in, my school, my university, my grandfather's house, my favorite hairdressers, my favorite falafel shop, my friends' houses, my cousins' houses, my neighbors' houses. Everywhere and everything that constitutes a memory, that once played a host to my childhood, my teenage years and my 20s, everything has been obliterated. I've addictively consumed all the videos everyone else has, but with a different purpose. To look for people I know, for signs of houses or buildings I spent my youth in. Even the tarmac of the roads seems to have been removed, leaving just tank-scored mud tracks, as though to ensure no one is watching the news ever has a chance of associating Gaza with what it really was, a beautiful, truly beautiful home. Meanwhile, the man is still lying on the pavement with his hands cable-tied behind his back, shouting, Ya Immi. It's worse when I get stuck in traffic jams. Usually on the afternoon school run in Manchester, I can't help but think about the Salah ad-Din Road or Rimal Road, where all those people, following IDF demands issued through leaflet drops and text messages, fled south and got bombed to bits all the same. 2 cars in front of me. I see a blue car suddenly struck by an F-35's missile, bouncing into the air in slow motion. At the school gates, I wonder if the other mums can see the trauma in my eyes. It's the same when I go into a new building. I'll be heading into a work meeting, waiting in the foyer, when suddenly I'll see the high roof collapsing, the windows blowing out, and I find myself trying to work out which doorframe or stairwell looks the strongest and the most able to protect me against the falling masonry. Then when I go into the meeting, I have to remind myself to downplay the Palestinian books the publishing house I work for publishes, to talk more about the safe, cozy British ones instead. English people don't like to talk about politics. I've learned in the 13 years I've been here. Who knows what they might privately think of me if I accidentally mention where I'm from. Even our funders, it seems, don't want us to say or do anything political, by which they mean about Palestine. This double life, this split identity, straddling 2 inconsistent worlds, thinking about loved ones back there while pretending to be on message here, is something all Palestinians are familiar with. We live from war to war, or rather onslaught to onslaught, knowing that what to British people is world news, impossibly distant, foreign and unrelatable, is to us very often local, more intimate and familiar than our own front doors. All first-generation exiles must experience something like this. But in the case of the Palestinian diaspora, it is coupled with an added threat, the ever-present possibility that you will be smeared as anti-Semitic, cancelled, shunned, and silenced, merely for identifying with the Palestinian cause. The moral outrage poised on who knows whose lips, waiting to strike. Add to this the association in the West's mind between Islam, only one of Palestine's religions, of course, and that ever-needed boogeyman, terrorism. And I really don't know what a lot of people think of me, the mums at the school gates or people I meet through work. All I know is that They live in one world, and I live in two.
Thank you to Noor and to Lighthouse Books for the invitation. I am going to read from the first pages of the book. Just very quickly, the book, as Noor said, tells a story of Sirine's family and her brother especially, who was in the resistance. And this chapter starts off the book from the prologue. So I'll begin. Visitor's Room, an Israeli prison, 1999. Returning to the prison consumed all of Yusuf's energy. Afterward, she remained in bed all day. But like the full moon, she had to return. She had to see her son. For in his absence, her chest was tight, her breaths suffocating. Habibi, ya aini, how are you? She asked him excitedly. I'm good. God makes things easy, Iyad responded. His face lit up with joy. Then he paused and glanced around. Where is the Hajj? He asked his mother. Abuk kan ta'ban. Your father was tired the past 2 days. He didn't think we would be able to see you, replied Yusuf. Iyad met his mother's words with a slight frown and lowered eyebrows. He nodded. His father had been dealing with diabetes for over 10 years. Sirine examined her younger brother as he exchanged words with their mother. She could see him panning the room as if still expecting their father to emerge from the shadows. His broad shoulders shrugged at the news. She saw her eyes in him, earthy, with a blend of green and brown, now shimmering against his short, dark beard. In Sirine's words, it was hard to imagine, despite all the years that had gone by with him in prison, that my brother had been involved in resistance activities, that my brother was a prisoner of war. She thought back to the last time she saw him free, a time before she had left for the U.S. The two of them were brother and sister. This was true. But they might as well have been strangers, leading separate lives. Strangers who left indelible marks on each other. Sirine had been around in Iyad's early years. She had spent many hours telling him stories and taking him on imaginary adventures. But it had been a decade and a half since they had lived under the same roof. A decade and a half since their paths began to diverge. In Sirine's voice. There is one story I always remember, the story of Shatir Hassan, the brave, smart, hard-working Hassan. In my version, Hassan falls in love with the king's daughter. The king agrees to let them marry on condition that Hassan is able to retrieve a stolen jewel on the peak of a mountain. 7 hills, each guarded by a hyena that Hassan has to outwit, stands between him and the peak. It is a near impossible task. Sometimes the story took me 2 nights to complete, and Iyad listened to every word. Shatir Hassan is ultimately able to outmaneuver the hyenas, free the jewel, and live happily ever after with the king's daughter. Sirine, I miss your stories, Iyad blurted out. Sirine smiled. It was as if the two of them were little again. He wanted her to talk about her life, but the prison walls did not inspire her. She glanced at her mother. Although she knew there was tenderness underneath, their relationship had always been rocky. She did not want to discuss her problems in the U.S. around her, and Iyad would likely not understand or might take their mother's side anyway. She decided the less they knew, the better, so she stuck with generalities. Mother and sister sat with Iyad for over an hour that day. His face was bright and alive. The 2 women were all smiles. They all laughed together, and he felt rejuvenated. But there were moments when they avoided eye contact and fidgeted, studied their hands, repeated questions they had already asked about Iyad's health and whether he had enough food. When they felt the sting of the place and were reminded of the walls around them, walls within the walls of occupation, within which each of their lives was framed. Before they left, Iyad pleaded with Sirine to help him. Sirine, you have to get me out. Use your contacts in the U.S. Don't leave me here. So just want to end by saying, usually when we do book talks, Sirine provides a longer backstory to the scene. And I think you can tell also we read the scene because for her it's a really important scene, and maybe this can come up either in the Q&A or afterwards if you have the questions about the scene, or we can talk about it afterwards. It's a shorter format, so.
Thank you. Thank you both. A round of applause for the last one as well, please. So I'm going to start our discussion focusing on these books. And I'd like to hear from all of you what drew you to the genre that you decided to portray these narratives in. So we have diaries and we have sci-fi. And we have memoir, and memoir written quite interestingly. So if I might start us with that, and then we will move forward. So let's go the other way. Sami first.
Yeah, I think we can maybe both say a little bit. For me, I settled on this sort of, the book is in two voices because Sirine's voice is really powerful in the story, the way she tells it. She's a storyteller in the way in Arabic we say hakawati, so like an oral storyteller. And so I wanted to somehow find a way to incorporate both of our voices, and her voice. And it ultimately, it's a story of her family, and in particular her brother, but through her words, right, through her voice. So, I don't know if you'd like to say something.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. Thank you very much for having us. And I think I left Palestine for college to Jordan, and I moved to the UN to work in New York City. And what drew me to write a story about my life is living in New York City in 1990. People will ask me, where are you from? And I will say Palestine, and I say Pakistan, and I say Palestine. And then they continue Israel. And I felt it's my responsibility to keep telling my story and my family story. And I always believed we live to tell. And Palestinian, over 15 million Palestinian, each one has their own story to tell. And I'm 100% sure there is more story powerful than my story, my family, and my brother Iyad. So when I met Sami, I just was looking forward for anybody who would like to listen, and I will keep telling details and details. And memory is very important for the Palestinian. It's the major thing is what we remember living in the occupation and repeating that memory with all the details. So we can be here like today, traveling all around just to speak with people like you. So it was very important for me that this book with all the details, the scene Sami read. I moved 1990 to New York, and 1999 I went back to visit Iyad, and I did not see him for many years, and he was sentenced to 215, and that's why this scene is very important for me, but it brings me to tears too. So thank you.
How I stumbled upon sci-fi, as Sirine mentioned, as a Palestinian, everything you do in life just funnels towards how do you talk about Palestine? How do you keep our identity as clear as possible? How do you relay it to everybody? Because from birth, there's someone trying to steal your identity, steal being Palestinian away from you. So what you do is every single conversation you have, every single thing you do in life goes toward trying to keep being Palestinian alive. Keep it in the conversation. Find representation wherever you can. So what happened was, the publishing house I currently work for, I did some freelancing translation for them, and they had Comma Press. They had a series called Plus 100s, the Plus 100s, and they would find a pivotal moment in the history of a certain country or a certain conflict and ask their commission writers to imagine what that conflict or what their lives would look like 100 years from that conflict. So we had Iraq Plus 100, where we commissioned the writers to imagine what Iraq would look like 100 years from the invasion of Iraq in 2004, I want to say 4 or 7, 3. Thank you very much. And this coincided with me doing work for Comma Press. So I approached the series editor, Ra Page, and I suggested that we do something similar for Nakba in 1948 for Palestine. And the reason it was sci-fi is because the series happened to be sci-fi. The series editor, he's the sci-fi nerd. I had nothing to do with that element of things. It was actually an education for me. But I said, great, Palestine, Nakba. We need to platform Palestinian voices. They need representation. Nobody wants to listen to Palestinians. Pro-Palestinian groups obviously want to listen, but breaking that bubble, bursting the bubble, the echo chamber, maybe through science fiction would work. So we commissioned 12 writers, and we asked them to imagine what life would be like for a Palestinian or for Palestine, wherever you are, diaspora, 1948, or the West Bank or Gaza. How would life be for them 100 years from Nakba? And we got the book. But it all goes about talking about your identity. Like Serene said, that representation, we crave it. We want to be heard. So we take the opportunity whenever we get it.
If I may come back to you, and just ask to kind of drill down slightly more into the genre, and particularly like the contrast. So what is it like to work in sci-fi and in diaries? And there's a moment in your introduction where you write that Palestinians are trying to stop the memory of loss from fading, and particularly stop the memory of the Nakba from fading. And I wondered how you saw it move, how that idea moves in some of the sci-fi that you edited, and vice versa in the diaries, and how that kind of feels to edit, I guess, or to kind of read and see a plethora of those voices.
Yeah. Would you like to? Okay. So the Nakba is, as we know, is an ongoing thing. We're still seeing the knock-on effects. People call them knock-on effects. I think the Nakba is still ongoing, as is. And for what we found in the short stories is that it was an opportunity for the writers to just they didn't need to look further. They didn't look anywhere. They just need to look at their current reality, and it would just describe what they're going through. And using sci-fi just helped them express more of the realities. I was very pleasantly surprised. Well, I say pleasantly, but I was surprised to see how each story, depending on, as a Palestinian, where you're living, reflected that particular reality. So, for example, Palestinians living in Israel, they struggle with the whole, they're suppressed, they're treated as second-rate citizens, and I think personally, as a Gazan, I think they've got it the worst. But so the Majd Kayal, the Palestinian from Haifa, who wrote the story and in the book, he was talking about living in parallel universes, going back and forth into. There were two Palestines. One of them had certain rules, another one had different rules, and it was all allegory for living in Israel and his conversations with his father, and so that. He managed to convey that struggle in his story, whereas Palestinians, Gazans who wrote the stories were talking more about the siege and not being able to leave. And it was very interesting to see how the different experiences were portrayed in those stories, all results of Nakba in 1948. So that's, and sci-fi was the way for them to express this. It's not very heavy on the sci-fi, but it's there. Yeah.
But I think that's the kind of incredible thing about sci-fi, is it gives you the chance to use a device to express your reality as well, right?
Absolutely, and it bypasses any kind of censorship. It bypasses, you could just do whatever you want, and yeah.
If I may move to, I guess this is a general question. This is kind of for all of you, so anyone feel free to jump in. In My Brother, My Land, you have written, I think it's in the introduction, we Arabs and Palestinians exist within a history of being second-guessed. And I wanted to know how it feels as writers, as editors, as people who contribute to the narratives, to push against this idea, but also to have to exist within that narrative of being second-guessed. And I guess what it means to put a book out, what it means to put out stories, knowing that that is the case? And maybe how you feel that that might be changing, or if it's not.
Yeah, I think for me, there was a moment where I was very sort of stuck in writing, because I felt that if I didn't get things down to a T in terms of the truth, that a Zionist would just pick, if I said her dress was red and it was blue, then they would delegitimize the whole story. And so I was in this moment speaking to a friend, and she said, "You need to stop second guessing, and you need." And she explained it to me. It dawned on me that we the oppressed, the victimized, and you second guess your narrative, right? You question whether what happened to you really happened, right? And so to write against that in itself is a form of resistance, right? And so I think the book in that way is a contribution to the struggle, right? So you have to keep fighting against the second guessing. And you can see this in any kind of question of victimization, right? When you question the victim, you don't believe the victim, right? It's a question of second guessing. And realizing that, I think for me was a bit liberating and allowed me to write.
For me, the story is, like she said, the Nakba. It started the day I was born. I'm hearing details from my mom and dad. My dad, 1948, became refugee from Nazareth. So my ancestor is from Nazareth. And then he left to Jenin with his mother. He was the youngest boy. But his two older brothers stayed in Nazareth. He could not see his brothers for the rest of his life. The family torn apart. So I will hear a story from him. And then my mother, who was 21 years old when 1967 happened, and I was a baby in her arm, and she was visiting in Amman, Jordan, and she was in the hotel room when she heard that we lost the war. And for 21 years old to take a decision by herself, I don't want to be a refugee anymore like my husband and his family in 1948. So she walked against the traffic back to Palestine to save the land. So hearing those stories from her, ended up she's living, raising her children without her husband, who stayed in Abu Dhabi for the rest of his life and come and visit her. So you read a lot about the struggle she went through to save the land. So for me, listening to the story, reminded daily by my mom and dad, and I see the separation between the family, made me insist, I have a story, and it's true. I'm living it daily. I'm walking to school, I'm seeing the occupation. I'm going to sleep, I'm hearing their tanks and their shooting. I'm reminded by the occupation from when I was a few months old. So it's the truth. It's my life experience. It's what my family went through, all of us under this occupation for the past, since 1948, past 80 years now. So that's why nobody can tell me it's not true, right? It's in every little details and emotion. And I think you saw, every time he read that scene, I cry. It's very hard. Iyad is 8 years younger than me, and I'm seeing him in prison, and I'm seeing this young kid sentenced to 215 years old. But what made me cry is I'm seeing it now. It's not something happened to Iyad, and it's done. It's not the past. It's still going on, and I'm seeing every day I turn Al Jazeera, I'll turn the news. I'm seeing over 10,000 Palestinian kids are hostages in Israeli prison with the highest sentence for their ages and for their crime. And I'm seeing them are sentenced to death without even trial by assassinating them and drones and bombs now in Gaza and in Jenin and all around the West Bank. So that's why I feel like I have a story and nobody can tell me it's not true.
Amazing.
I agree 100% with Serene. We are the story. We are walking proof. We are testimonies. Our lives are a testimony that this is there is such a thing as objective truth. I was telling you, I did have moments of self-doubt. I did. We all do. I'm thinking, well, maybe I did get the wrong end of the stick here. Sometimes you do think, but then you think, you look at yourself, you look at your life, you educate yourself, you learn, you listen to the people around you, you listen to your grandparents, you see what's happening in your life, and you realize, no, we're on the right side of history here, and there's absolutely no doubt about the righteousness of our path and our cause. Yeah.
The thing is, they gaslight you and then you internalize it, right? Like, that's the problem.
Yeah. Incredible. Thank you all. If I may return to Sirine and Sami, your brother Iyad is such an incredible character in this book. He's a resistance fighter. He's your brother. He's a son. Sometimes he's an errant youth. He's kind of all of these things at once. And I feel like the portrait that you portray of him is one that is extremely livable, and one that is also just very stark in his role in resistance. Mm-hmm. And at no point do you, as far as I understand it, do you downplay it. But at no point is there a shortage of love for him. And we've been talking about how narratives, how you get gaslit, how there are ways of ignoring a Palestinian or of saying that what they're saying isn't true. And one of those is particularly keyed towards resistance fighters, this idea that they're monsters or things like that. And so I wondered, maybe from a process point of view, but also as you were writing, how it was to write him as a whole person and what it felt like to write this, particularly knowing that the media lines around Palestinian resistance are so aggressive quite often.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, when I heard Sirine tell her story and then I went back and learned more about Iyad, for me it was, I set out to just tell the life and let the life speak for itself. And again, we go back to this question, in no other conflict would we be having this conversation, right? Like, we wouldn't be questioning the armed resistance as, being monsters and having to write against that. So when you tell the story of a person's life as it should be in a three-dimensional way, then you're going to find all these, the smiles, the tears, the good, the bad. Armed resistance is not going to be always the way you want it to be, and clean and so on. And so there's a lot to contend with.
For me, history will judge us. Historically, Gandhi was rejected in so many Western country. Nelson Mandela spent 26 years in prison, and then he became the leader of South Africa. And I will look at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all those people who either took resistance by speaking or by marching or by fighting. For us, the Palestinian, we have no choice. Literally, living under the occupation did not leave us any choice. For us, is we lost 1948, and I think you touched on the people who was living in 1948, the Palestinian who's second citizen, and then us, the West Bank, 1967, and then Oslo, which is Oslo for me, it was the worst. We are divided to A and B and C and wall and checkpoints. And my son, my kids, when we visit, we live in New York now, they ask hundreds of questions about all these restrictions and road for settlers and road for Palestinian and why this checkpoint, why all people who carry American citizen fly to Tel Aviv and us, we have to go through borders and checkpoint through Jordan because your mother is Palestinian. That's what always my answer to my children. So for us, what we expected to do? Just what else? For Iyad was very tough time for struggles. The first intifada, the first uprising, the second uprising, and for young kids who live under the occupation, it's really frustrated. So for me, I always listen to Iyad how He was optimistic and he wanted a free Palestine. And he used to tell my mom, "You're so stingy. You have all these children, sacrificed one for the watan, for the country." So he thought himself is the sacrifice for the country. And he picked that road of fighting the occupation and resist and refuse to live under the occupation. So it's a path he chose, but he's my brother. I will love him either way. And he's not just my brother. I'm the third girl, he's the third boy, and we're the only one in the whole family. We look alike. So we're like twins, and we have that special connection. And actually, like Sami said, when I talk about this reading he did, I think I spent 15 minutes talking in little details how he came in and saw me after 10 years. Like the connection between us, it's like we never separated the 10 years. Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you.
Basma, I wanted to turn back to you here. We've been talking about the ways in which people are portrayed. And in your introduction to Palestine Plus 100, you talk about how actually this idea of, like, sci-fi often portrays an other, portrays potentially an enemy, or portrays something like that. And you said that in the literary canon of Palestinian literature, actually seeing the other depicted as this one thing, as this one enemy, or as a very almost opaque or very one-sided thing is not particularly common. In Palestinian literature, the other, the Israeli or the enemy or something, is given nuance. There is a huge amount of nuance in that character. And I wondered how it feels to kind of have the unequal responsibility to share nuanced narratives when Palestinian narratives are not offered the same grace.
My initial reply, my emotional reply right now is this book was published in 2019. Today, I'm very tempted sometimes to let my anger control me and just tarnish all Israelis with the same brush, the way they kind of tarnish us with the same brush, because sometimes it's just so angry and you think, why am I even spending headspace on this? But no, Palestinian writers, and Palestinians, the dehumanization process that happens in Israel towards the Palestinians, it doesn't happen the other way around on the same level, to be honest. And we, for some reason, I mean, I don't know, we do manage to see that, like you said, the nuances in Israeli characters. Because I don't know. I remember trying to joke around with the Israeli troops as they were going through our roads. We'd be playing volleyball on the street, and we'd see the troops on both sides. You'd probably, yes. And we'd just kind of try and be cute and try and interact with them. It's not part of our. I don't remember being subjected to the brainwashing that the world claims to think that we were subjected to. We do manage to be objective and see the Israelis as a result of their own trauma. This might be a very extreme case, but we have managed. There's a poem by Rifat al-Arayr saying, "I am you," and he is clearly saying, "I am you, you are me. You've been through something, and you're taking out on me now." So. Maybe it's because it's a very good question. I'm just trying to kind of work through it as I think about it. Maybe Sami, maybe you have something to say there.
Yeah, I mean, if I put my my anthropology hat on for a second, I've written an article on dehumanization, and I just think that the thing is, the oppressor kills us. Right? And we exist in the world, and we have to live. And we're all human, them and us, right? It's not that we're less human or they're more human. And we're Palestinians are in a situation where you have to address your oppressor and try to figure things out. It makes no sense to say that the oppressed dehumanize their oppressor. The oppressed die, right? The oppressed get killed. The oppressed get annihilated. They don't have the power to do anything. They resist, of course, but they're resisting to create a better world. They're not resisting to destroy the world, right? There is a difference here between violence and resistance. The oppressor engages in violence. The oppressed resists, and they resist because they're trying to create a better life, right? They're not trying to create apartheid. They're not trying to create settler colonialism. So I think this is I don't want to go on for too long, but I feel like with Iyad, it wasn't about. I don't like this word human. It wasn't about trying to create this human image. He's human. I mean, if you don't recognize that or see that, that's your problem and your racism, right? It's not my responsibility as a writer to make you to see that in a sense. But just one last thing in my book, or in our book, the Israeli actually, there's a bit of intentional. The Israeli doesn't show up except as a soldier. Yeah.
Sorry, I want to say something
actually,
about it. I'm born and raised in a small village called Kfar Rai, and I never ever seen an Israeli civilians until I got a job in the United Nations. Never. All I thought all my life that the Israeli is the soldiers and the tanks who's coming, banging in our door, torture us, and arresting my brother and pushing my mom around. I ended up have 2 brothers in prison and a sister. So that's the Israeli I know. And then for me, it's a military, it's an army, it's war. It's if I don't run fast when they enter my village, I've been shot and killed. When I was in school, 5 of my classmates were killed, and I talked about it in the book. And then that's what we saw. Is a military soldiers, we fear them. And actually, I keep saying that before we go to bed, some of us will tell our children just go to sleep, the monster will come or something. Us, the Israeli soldiers is coming. That's our scary, that we run and hide under the blanket, that the Israeli soldiers is coming. I hear their voice. And then we will be so freezing in our place, listening to the hammers or the tanks, and then we're running to hide in whatever corner they are. And I don't want to say how many times we wet our bed because the Israeli soldiers is coming. Even in older age, we were wetting our bed because the Israeli soldiers are coming. So that's the fear they planted in our heart. So for us, when we see them coming, reaction in my generation was the throwing the rocks. Collecting all the old tires from cars, garage, and set them in fire to prevent them getting faster to the village or to the city to arrest somebody until somebody escape. And when you read the book, you're going to see how many times my brother Iyad tried to escape and slept outside in the wild for days and days and could not eat or come home to shower because he's fearing they will capture him and throw him in prison. But in the end, he was captured. So they planted the fear of us. And when you're afraid, you want to fight and resist to end that fear.
Can I add, I think part of, I'm just having thought about it for a second, maybe part of processing your trauma sometimes as writers is to understand the person who subjected you, to try and understand that person, what they went through, or try and maybe, I can't think of examples in this book that where the Israelis are mentioned specifically, but I was in the introduction. I was giving examples of other writers like Aed al-Haifa. I think Ghassan Kanafani. He goes and faces the person. He goes back to the house where he used to live, and he faces the Israeli person who lived there, and turns out a really nice Israeli lady. So So part of the writer's process of processing their own trauma as Palestinians is to understand the oppressor and how they think. Because ultimately, like Sami said, the whole reason we're going through what we're going through is, or we're being oppressed, is because they're dehumanizing us. We didn't ask for this. So, yeah.
And there is another book, I think, The Lemon Tree, for Tolan, while Bashir Khairi go to his house. And then she was great. And she, truly, I ended up, I let my students read the book and I FaceTime with him in the U.S.
That's a very good example, yeah.
I know, but in the end, I lost my job for that. I was really fired from my job because I let my students reading that book and FaceTime with the author and the two characters from the book. And she really ended up giving the house, want to give back the house to the Palestinian, and the Israeli highest court refused. So now she gave it to be a daycare center for the Palestinian and the 1948, Palestinian 1948, and the Israeli. She refused even to live with it later. But I ended up losing my job.
Well, more for them. That's insane. Wow. A warning to the audience, I will be soon asking for your questions. This is your, 2-minute warning. So I have not a final question, but a question I would like to ask, which, as I think many of my questions have been this evening, unfair on you all. In My Brother, My Land, I'm going to quote, Iyad is in prison and he's reading about different ideologies, and he's trying to kind of work out how he's gotten to where he is and where he wants to go from now, and he's trying to understand his place in the world. And I was really struck by this line. Western philosophical claims about the freedom of man simply meant freedom of Western man, not his, Iyad's freedom, not that of Palestinians, not that of the whole of humanity. I think that freedom is a narrative in itself. And I wondered, given that we seem to have a flawed idea of freedom, how do you think we may need to rethink our way of telling the story of freedom in order to make it more honest? And is there anyone or anything that you feel gives you heart or gives you inspiration for that?
Wow.
Sorry.
It was the wrong time to ask about inspiration.
About that. Go ahead.
Start. Absolutely, start.
It's funny that I think I said it in the book in the end. You know, it's like everybody feel like I'm the lucky one. I moved to the United States, the land of freedom, right? The land of democracy. It's so funny. And my mom has 13 children, and she always said, Serene is the lucky one. I don't know where is the luck being living in the U.S., especially after now Trump won the election. But anyhow, I'm sorry. Palestinian living in the West were not free, and living in Palestine were not free. Like I talk about, I lost my job. I was really fired because of that book. And then I got another job, and my boss just got lost the past couple of weeks. 4,000 email in one day. By the way, I stopped checking with him, asking him to fire me because I'm a threat to me and my book is a threat to the democracy of Israel. The democracy of Israel. just that's the joke I keep saying. Yeah. And calling me a terrorist wearing the kufiya like Arafat and the Al Maghribi. I read the first 15 pages of the email and then I stopped reading. I got numb to the democracy. So, yeah. I don't know if us Palestinians are free. I see changes. I'm sorry. I see changes. Look. If I came before October 7th to speak here and my book was out, I don't think I will see this amount of faces. Thank you very much. But we need more of changes from the Western media and the West. okay, the Arab country, forget about them. They're sleeping. They took a high dose of bell, a sleeping bell, and I don't know how many years it's going to take the Arab country to wake up. But I think the Western are waking up, and I'm so happy when I watch the news and see thousands of people walking in demonstration. I'm so glad when they see the people showing me on Instagram, they're posting and they're reposting and they're sharing what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. And what happened in Palestine caused by the British mandates. So I think the fixing come from this region. You guys need to fix it after 100 years. So that's
I think that part is influenced by Sylvia Wynter, actually. I think that the resistance, the armed resistance, if you look at the last 70, 80 years, has obviously made significant gains and become much more sort of effective in tactics and the way it works and so on. But we are still missing, in my view, the kind of the vision of what when we say liberation from the river to the sea, how to materialize what that means and kind of expressing that. And part of that is to be speaking about how do you de-Zionize the Jewish people, right? Like how do you remove Zionism from Israel, right? Thinking of liberation in that sense, right? With a de-Zionized reality, a reality where there is no Zionism. And I think, when reading the book, the interesting thing that I learned as I was reading the book is sort of the philosophy of Islamic Jihad, which actually sees the world as oppressor-oppressed, and sees this as a struggle for land rather than a struggle against religion, which is something that most of us don't realize, right? Like when we think of Islamic Jihad, we think that this is it's Muslim and Jewish and so on, but this is about oppressor oppressed and a struggle over land.
And I want to say something. It's the next generation after me, they're seeing more settlement. Like I'm now, this year when I visit, there is a new settlement out of my mom window. So their kids are growing up with the Israeli taking more land. It's not 1948, it's not just Jerusalem, which was given to them in a gold plate by Trump as a capital. It's just even the West Bank. And then the way we were divided, most of our land were gone. So I feel like the people who are living there, they're losing everything, and they're losing hope, and they're losing education, and even being able to speak freely and all of that. So I feel like they're desperate for fighting the occupation, and with any mean. Like I talk to so many people, it's like they have nothing to live for, or there is no hope for this to be solved peacefully. And then they saw, like I said before, the Oslo and the outcome, and they felt with the Oslo agreement, we lost even more. And it's very sad. Like I think I talk about it. Last year, I rented a car by mistake for the first time, and I'm driving back from Ramallah to Jenin, and I ran out of gas. And I put the navigation, it says like 1 kilo, just take a ride. I took a ride. And then the drones, I get a call from the rental car, get out of the road, it's a settler road. Us Palestinians, we're not safe in our own territory. So one ride, I'm in a settler road, not a Palestinian road. And I don't want to describe what is a settler road, what is a Palestinian road. It's just so sad. So, yeah, those people who are living there is like, I go there, it's depressing, and then I leave back to the U.S. or I leave out. But those people, they live and die in this miserable situation.
I just wanted to just also recognize that the story is in the West Bank mostly, and what is happening in Gaza is also just annihilation on a different scale, and So it's maybe different versions of the same reality, but it's just a matter of scale.
Absolutely. Overall, it's just we've got dystopic realities. We've got the checkpoints and pretty much what you described, apartheid going on in the West Bank, the settlers just eating into the land. That's the West Bank's needing to get from Ramallah to Jerusalem, which is what, an hour's drive takes how long, just going through the Qalandia checkpoint. You've got that reality going on the West Bank. In Gaza, you have the siege and you have the occupation as well. And in 1948, the Palestinians living in Israel, you've got the oppression that they face. And that's just a comment. I actually didn't have an answer to your question about freedom.
That is fair.
I think they've covered all the, so... Yeah,
I don't feel it any free. Like 1948, like my two uncle, Abdullah and Abdul Karim, I know their name, never seen them. My two uncle. And I have cousins in Nazareth I never seen. And why? Since 1993, and I'm an American citizen with an American passport. But in front of the occupation, I'm Palestinian. And I'm not allowed in 1948. And my children, who 3 of them born in the U.S. in New York, their mother is Palestinian. They're not allowed in 1948. So it's segregation. It's Jim Crow. It's like whatever you could describe it. It's apartheid. It's that even when we leave, we get education and we get other citizenship. We go back and we are...
Overrides. Your Palestinian identity overrides any kind of passport you have.
Yeah. And then you have to cross through Jordan, the Israeli border, to Jericho, to Jenin. Like she said, I think from Amman to Jenin is an hour drive. I spent 18 hours in checkpoints to visit my mom every summer. So that's the situation, and that's what people are living through. And like we said, we drive in the road. We're not safe from the settlers who they shooting from every direction. Or now... my mom cannot pick up the olive harvest. Usually by October she's done because the settlers preventing the Palestinians to get to their land to pick up the olives. Yeah, so it's no end. There is no end to the occupation this way.
Thank you all so much. We probably only really have time for 1 or 2 kind of shortish questions, but we will be having a book signing afterwards for you to ask more. So can I have a show of hands? Do we have any questions? You got one here? All right. Oh, wait for me.
What is the dilemma like for you of finding the balance between offering hope and depicting the awful reality? How do you balance that in your writing?
Hope and the reality of things?
Me? Oh boy, by talking, by telling the people. Like I will be, sometimes like when we have book talk or even when I'm watching the news, I will have so many hopes and then suddenly there is minutes while I lose any. Yesterday we were having dinner and somebody told me they're going to annex the West Bank and then you're going to lose going back as a Palestinian. And literally in the middle of the dinner last night, we were in Exeter University. I started crying. And they looked at me, it's like, it's happening now. It is. I'm from there. I'm rooted there. I always joke saying that if Jesus and Mary have the DNA that time and my DNA, I will be related to them because I'm from Nazareth and I'm 100% they look like me, olive skin, maybe green eyes and curly hair. But that's how I always say. But imagine the reality is they're winning and they're gaining more land and we're shrinking and we're shrinking and we're shrinking. And look how many, over 60,000 people. It's the biggest genocide happening in Gaza, and that's the reality. And then I keep having hope that, if this won the election of is Netanyahu's gone, or if this prime minister interfered, or if this country brought them to trial in the front of the biggest court in the world, that will stop. But it's not stopping. Nothing is stopping the aggression and the genocide the Israelis doing against the people in Gaza or the people in the West Bank. But the only relief for me because I feel I'm outside Palestine and have a burden in my shoulders to, like Sami, last word, he said, last word my brother told me, Matin Sini, don't forget me here. You see? So that's a burden for me. So I don't want to forget him. I don't want to forget any Palestinian in prison. I don't want to forget any family who lost a brother or sister. So the only salvation for me is to talk about it, the reality and what's happening, and hoping that the more I talk about it, the more I'm gaining voice within my side to end this genocide, to end this occupation. And then there is time while I have hopes, and there is time I lose it and I sit and cry. And now my mom is 80 years old and the only one left in the house. We ended up 13 of us. Sadly, one killed and 12 all around the world. And then she is holding to that land, and we're fearing if she leave, Trump and Netanyahu threatened to annex the West Bank, and then what she did, 1967, she's losing now. Yeah, so it's I don't know. It's not an easy thing to have hope and dream that there is a free Palestine. My aunt was 89 years old when she died, and her word for me is, if Palestine become free, come and tell me in my grave. And that's the burden I had now. And I don't want my children, my grandchildren to do that. I don't want to say it to them. I want the help of all the people that it happened in my lifetime. Palestine is free in my lifetime. I don't want to tell my children, my grandchildren, if it's free after I died, come and tell me in my grave. Like, I don't want that. So that's why the only thing I can do is speak about it. That's the only weapon in my hand now.
Yeah, no, I kind of just an extension of what Serene said, and it's going to sound so cheesy, but through my children, I've got 2 children, and I take them to all the marches. We took them to Gaza in 2022. We went there for a whole month, and the first 3 days there was intense bombing because the Islamic Jihad fired some rockets in, and there was obviously the normal reply, and there was 3-4 days of intense bombing. They witnessed all of that. And then it was 3 weeks of just going to the beach, meeting my cousins. And then after the 3 weeks, it was 12 hours on the Rafah border in the middle of the heat trying to exit. So just them having that memory, I told them, now you are truly Palestinians. Now I can say that, you've experienced a bit of what I've been experiencing. We're all Palestinians, just a fraction. So just them knowing this and talking about it to their friends, and to me, keeping the story alive and through them gives me hope. Just keeping Palestine alive within us, to me, and taking it everywhere we can, that gives me hope. Seeing my mum, who was in Gaza and recently came to Manchester, she's lost everything, yet she manages to sit and joke, and she every day she's hearing news about her cousin being killed, or her, it's just she's lost so much, but she still has hope, and that gives me hope. And obviously we've all got moments of darkness and despair, right? Who doesn't? So it is very tricky to maintain that balance and that dual emotion, dual reality you've got in your head. It's very tricky.
Yeah, like I'm looking around. When I walked in, a young lady was in the door and she was wearing a kufiya, and I said, "Are you Palestinian?" She said, "No, I'm from Turkey." So it's just like seeing the kufiya, I could count few of them around, and I bet you maybe I'm the only one Palestinian. He's Lebanese. So that's hope. And then when I walk in the street, I travel from the US everywhere with it. People will stop me in the airport and say, "Free Palestine." This is a dream for me coming true. People will never recognize us and recognize the Palestinian. And like she said, this summer I insist my 3 children to go. And we were there in Jenin, and the time we arrived actually is the same. For 15 days we could not step out of the door. And I want my children to see how my mom cannot sleep from the drone 24/7 in the top of her head, and how much it took us in and out of the city. And Jenin is almost following Gaza. Gaza, the whole road, the whole home is unpaved. We're back to use the donkey to the stores and to the hospitals and to the shop because the Israeli demolished and unpaved every single street in Jenin. Yeah, so.
Oh, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say I tend to not think of it as hope. I think of it as a will to fight. So just having the will to fight and keep going regardless. And you see how people are, continue to fight and resist and persevere over there. So, we shouldn't be thinking anything different.
Yeah, I think when I visited Iyad in the prison, he told me that Algerian revolution stayed 150 years and 1 million people were killed. And I was like, wow. He entered prison as a young kid. He finished high school in prison. And then he learned things I did not know. He taught me that when I visit him with the scene he read. So yeah, it's the same. We will be free, and I think it's soon. I think it's soon. I have a lot of hopes. Thank you.
I think you're right. That is all we have time for this evening. Our writers and our editor will be signing books. You can chat to them and chat amongst yourselves. There are actions that you can take.
Yes.
I believe on the 16th of December, the Parliament here will be debating arms sales to Israel. So you can hound your MPs constantly. There are marches. There's a march on Saturday. We have things that we can all do. So can we please have a huge round of applause for our writers and our editor, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to say something. Sorry. I just want to say something when she said about that. I grew up in Kufra. I have one newspaper, 2 pages every Friday, and I will read it and read it and read it and read it. And you're lucky you have the computer, you have the phone, you have the social media, you have the technology. Use it. Really use it. Tweet, send messages, file petitions, call. Like sometimes I will be driving and the public radio has a program. I will call. And I will give my opinion and feedback. So we need to speak up. And the more we speak up, I think the more we'll educate people. And you're lucky, guys. You're in this time while you have all this in between your hand. And this beautiful all around you books to learn and educate yourself about other culture and accepting other culture. And like Sami said, accepting us Palestinian, we're human. We love to laugh, as you saw us. We cry, we laugh, we dream, and we have hope. So help us to achieve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you.